Hey everybody, welcome back to the Time Pass Podcast. This is your host, Ashika. Thank you so much for joining me today, you guys. If you haven't done so already, please check me out on Facebook at Time Pass Podcast. Like me on Instagram at timepass_podcast. And check out my YouTube channel, subscribe to it, follow it. You can find the link to that on my website, timepasspodcast.com, or on the link in my bio on my Instagram page. So please check me out there where you can watch all the episodes of the Time Pass Podcast as well. And if you are listening to me on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Pandora, whatever listening platform you're using to check out the show, please make sure that you like it and are subscribed or following the Time Pass Podcast. All right, you guys, today's episode, I'm going to talk about current events, something that happened that inspired this conversation that I want to have today, and that is a death in the family. So I have an uncle who passed away just a couple days ago here, and the funeral was yesterday, and Indian funerals, especially Hindu ones, take a long time, and there's a lot of rituals, traditions, and it's quite strict involved. They're actually in the Bay Area, and I actually work on Saturdays now on the weekends, so I was unable to attend the funeral, although my heart and prayers reach out to that part of our family for sure. But what this started to remind me of was death, and how we all deal with death and grief, essentially, right? Because we have that feeling of grief when we lose someone. And I have to say, dealing with death is different from person to person. It's very individualized. My experience is not going to be the same as yours. It's not going to be the same as your best friends or my best friends or our parents or even our siblings, because the relationship you have with people and when they pass away, how it affects you is different person to person. And for somebody like me, which in this episode I'm going to talk about how I've dealt with death and how it's kind of affected me growing up and then as an adult. So it's very much subjective to my experiences with death. Other people I know have had, like both of my parents are still alive. Other people I know have had to deal with death at a young age when they lose a parent. So this is my personal experience with dealing with death, but I think some of the lessons of grief that I get to at the end, and as we talk about how we deal with death, that may apply to more than just me. So let's get on with it, shall we? So I would have to say, when I was younger, there were people that died, obviously, right? People die every day, but nobody that I was super close with that I comprehended or really understood. Like, I had two of my dadas pass away when I was really, really young. I vaguely remember them. I remember the idea of them, but I don't really remember their faces. So for those of you that don't know, dada is like uncle. So like my dad's older brothers. Two of them passed away when I was super young. But I remember, like, I had these toys that they gave me because they both lived in Canada, and when they would come visit, they would give me, like, these extravagant toys. And I had those until adulthood. I think I got rid of them when I was, like, 21. But anyway, so when I was younger, death didn't really touch me. I didn't comprehend it. I didn't really understand it. I kind of knew it was a big deal. I knew it was, like, somber, but I didn't really get it. And I think a lot of times, like, growing up Indian, like, at least in my family, like, they don't really take kids to a lot of that stuff because they don't want to subject them to all that, because we do, like, the viewings and all that. So a lot of times you weren't actually accompanying your parents to these things unless they had no choice. So I didn't really attend any big funerals when I was a child either, that I remember. So my kind of first experience with death, I would have to say I was a teenager, and it was a family friend of ours, really like funny, charismatic, jokester, older uncle that passed away, and he used to come around all the time. When my cousin, who was raised with us, when she got married, he was very instrumental in all that and super helpful, so he was around like all the time, and we would go to his house. So like I had a relationship with this uncle, and then when he passed away, it was like the first time I was like, wow, like I was maybe 16, and I was like, wow, like this is somebody that I know, that I interact with all the time, who has now passed away. And that's the first funeral that I attended that I like remember. Like the viewing and the funeral, like we went to that and I remember it. And that was kind of like my first experience where I could comprehend and understand like this person that I saw and like interacted with and had a relationship, now they're gone. But again, because he wasn't like a blood uncle, you know, he was just like an acquaintance uncle, but still somebody that we interacted with, it didn't really affect me so much. So I would say after that, my grandmother, my nani, her and my mom have always kind of been tight, and in turn, I developed a very close-knit relationship with her as well, because she would come visit all the time, she would call all the time, and we would call her and vice versa. So we were super close, plus she was also my godmother. So I had a pretty close relationship with her, and my nani was like, she traveled. You know, my nana died when he was 47, so she basically raised her kids, you know, from that point on her own. And so she's an independent woman a little bit, and she would travel a lot. She would go to Fiji, she went to India, she went to Canada, she went to Hawaii. Like, this lady would travel. And maybe that's where I'm like, I want to travel too. Maybe that's where I get it from, because I think my grandmother really loved to travel. And the fact that she was independent, like if somebody passed away down here, because she lived in Canada, so if somebody passed away here in the States, if she could do it, she'd be like, okay, I'm coming, and she would cut the ticket and fly down here and go to the funeral. There came a time in her life where she could no longer travel as easily for her health. So at that point, when somebody would die in the family down here in the Sacramento area, or even down in LA, she would call me and ask me if I would go, if I would attend, on kind of like on her behalf, because she always wanted somebody from the family to be represented. And in the beginning, it kind of started off with like my uncles would come down from Canada, and then they would be like, are you going to go to the funeral? Like, let's all go. You can drive us and pick us up from the airport. So it's kind of like convenience at first, but then it kind of turned into a thing where she would literally call and be like, this person died. And I'd be like, yeah, you can't go. And she's like, well, can you go? And so it became my thing. Like, somebody's dead, I'm going to go pay my respects. And I'm like a weird person, okay? So like, I'm that kind of person when people start crying, like I think it's kind of funny. Like, so the first few funerals I went to where I didn't have like relationships with people, it was kind of like, I'm like biting the inside of my cheek, because I'm like, don't laugh, don't smile, super disrespectful. But I think that's an awkwardness, and as you start to attend more funerals and start to comprehend it a little more, you start to kind of dive into the emotion behind it and start to understand it and start to feel bad for these people. And I would have to say, I mean, because this was like distant family. I have a huge family. So like, there were people whose funerals that I was asked to attend that I had never even met before. When I showed up at the funeral and then at the house after, people would be like, I kind of recognize, Indian people are so like, I kind of recognize you. Like, who are you again? And I'd be like, oh, so do you know so-and-so? And start with my nani's name, and they'd be like, yeah. And I was like, I'm her daughter, this one, her daughter. And people would be like, I knew it. I knew your nose looked familiar. And it's like, Indian people were so like distinctive, and my family has a very distinctive nose. However, I would have to say, I don't exactly have the family knows. I have this part of it, but not this part of it. Anyway, I digress. So I like the long part of it, but not the wide part of it. So you'd have to really know my family well to recognize my nose. Anyway, I digress. But I was going to these people's homes as a stranger just on behalf of my grandmother because she asked me to go. So I kind of started attending these funerals, and after a while you start to see the same family members at these things, and you kind of bond, and people, you know, kind of like, oh yeah, nice, you know, in the circumstances, it's like, yeah, good to see you, you know. People are like, thanks for coming, and that became my shtick. And then when my grandmother passed away, I've kind of still kept doing that because I feel like if she was alive, she would have asked me to go, and I just feel like if I'm not working and I can attend something and it's near me and I can make it, I'm gonna make it, because it's just how I like to stay connected to my grandmother. But anyway, I would have to say the first time I dealt with death on the family end was when one of my uncles died. So my masi, my mom's sister, my aunt, her husband was here in Sacramento, and her kids, my cousins, my brothers, they're up in Canada, and she's up in Canada. And I believe it was a Mother's Day. So my mom went to Canada because my grandma, my nani, was not doing so well at this time. So my mom went up to Canada to spend Mother's Day with my nani, and she took off. Well, the day after she gets there, my uncle here passes away, so my masi's husband. And they all live in Canada. My mom's not here. I'm literally the only one here. And so my masi calls me, my aunt, and she's like, hey, he passed away, like, what can you do? Like, we don't know anybody, like, you need to find us an Indian priest, we need to do all this. And I'm like, hold on, I got somebody. So I was essentially handling all the funeral details and organizing everything down here. My cousins, my brothers, they flew down right away, and I got them in touch with our family priest. My masi flew down, I took them over there, we had like a little meeting. He found like the mortuary and the crematorium for us because we do cremation in Hinduism, and so kind of got it all set up. But like I was saying, Hindu death rituals and ceremonies is not just what you do at like the crematorium or at the funeral home. Every night there's like people that come over. Them being based in Canada, my home became the hub. Like, it became the home for the funeral house. And I was young. I was like, I was in my late 20s maybe, and I was just like a deer in headlights. I had no idea what to do, and my mom wasn't around to guide me because she was in Canada. And so my mamas and a lot of people from up there flew back down here to attend the funeral and do all that. Well, my mom ended up staying up there with my nani because nani couldn't fly, and mom was like, hey, I just went there to visit, so I'll stay. Brothers and sisters, you all go down there. I literally had no idea what it was like and how much work it is, and you're dealing with grief and funeral arrangements and people constantly showing up to your house. Yet in our particular customs that we follow, the house where somebody dies, you're not allowed to light the stove until like a certain amount of days after the death and after certain rituals have taken place. So we had to rely on family members and people we know to bring us food to then feed the people who are now hanging out here, because you can't light your stove. It's a complicated thing. But I would have to say that is when I realized that the people that show up for you when you're going through something like death, those are the ones, those are the real ones. Those are literally the real ones. And that just cemented into me more that I would rather be there with you at your time of grief than be there with you at your time of celebration. Think about it. If you're celebrating, if you're having a party, everyone's going to show up to eat free and drink free. Of course, everybody's with you in the good times. Who is with you in your down times, in your hardest of times, in your most sorrowful, grief-ridden times? Those are the real ones. Mark my words. I've seen it with my own eyes. I've seen my own family members show up empty-handed, knowing that I'm a young 20-some person who has no idea what they're doing with funeral arrangements, showing up empty-handed and leaving empty-handed and not offering help. And seeing, like, not family members, but family friends fucking step it up and come through and show up and help out. I remember distinctly, like, even the boys in my family, like, so all my cousins were here and my uncles, and they all, like, went out to go, like, to go out to eat or whatever, and I was like, you guys all left me. And they're like, you literally have to stay home because you have people coming in and out. You can't come. And I was like, I felt so sad because I'm such a social person, but I had responsibilities, right? And I love hanging out with all my brothers, all my cousins. So it's like, I felt so bad because it was the first time they had ever really, like, excluded me from something. And I remember that night, I was just, it took an emotional toll on me because I remember calling my mom and my nani, and I was, like, crying on the phone. And I was like, Mom, I miss you. And she's like, what's going on? And I was like, I just miss you. And then my nani got on the phone, and she was like, what's going on? And then I kind of told her, like, I was like, well, this person comes, and they're not helping, and I don't know what to do. And so they both kind of, like, talked me through it and gave me, like, confidence and advice. And my nani was so good at doing that stuff. So my nani was, like, so good at that stuff. She was such a calming presence. And they got me through that. And again, like, going through that experience, it just, like, again, cemented in me that I would rather show up for people when they're going through that, because you are losing your mind during that time. And people aren't the best. Sometimes people that you think will be there for you will not be there for you. So I really, really like to be there for people because I think it's super important when they're going through times of grief. I would say the one death since then that has affected me the most was the death of my grandmother, of my nani. It was 6 years ago, and kind of a very important day in my life because it was the day my daughter was born as well. And I have to say, if I didn't have that distraction of my daughter being born the day my grandmother passed away, I don't know how much worse it would have been for me, and I can only imagine how messed up my mom would have been. So my grandmother was sick, and we all knew it, and as close as I am to her, I was most worried about my mom. Once we kind of knew that, you know, and all the time we have with her is what we have, I had started prepping her. Like, I was worried about my mom because I thought she would lose her shit because they were so close. I had started prepping her. Like, I would have conversations with her where I was like, you know, Nani's not, we don't know how long we have. Like, are you prepared? Do you know what you're gonna do? Like, how are you gonna handle yourself? You need to come to terms with this. Like, it sounds like kind of an asshole thing to do, but I needed to do it to get my mom prepared for it. And she had gotten to the point where she was, like, bedridden, and she was on a hospital bed living with my masi, and she couldn't, like, come to very much. Like, she was just out all the time. And I remember when I got pregnant, she was the first person I told, and I remember she guessed. I didn't even tell her. It was like she guessed by what I had said, because I was like, oh yeah, my mom's making me crab curry. And she's like, oh yeah, why? And I was like, oh, I just felt like eating it. And she's like, oh, you felt like eating it, or you felt like eating it, like, or do you have a craving? So these old Indian ladies are so fucking sharp, like, you have no idea. And I was like, I have a craving. And she's like, oh, because she was waiting. She really wanted me to have a child. And so she was waiting. She was waiting for me to get pregnant. And she knew that I really wanted a child too. So she was super excited. And I remember she was like, don't tell anybody. So I literally didn't tell anybody that I was pregnant until 3 months. I told like my work. And then at 6 months, I told my family. She literally told me to wait that long. She didn't want me to get like a gender test. And I also didn't want a gender test. And I basically just listened to all her advice. So I didn't do that. I didn't want a gender test. I look at it as like nature's last surprise. You get what you get. Like, be happy. And so once I got to the latter stages of my pregnancy, her health started to really deteriorate. And it was a point where like we would call to talk to her and she wouldn't even come to. And I remember my mom used to say like, oh, the baby came, the baby came. And that would get her to open her eyes and come to and come on the phone. So I could talk to her, my mom could talk to her. So she was very much waiting. And I remember we would have conversations and I was like, oh, are you gonna come when my daughter's born? And she's like, no. Sorry. It's a little emotional to talk about. And she was like, no, I'm not going to come. I would come if I could come. You know that. You're going to have to bring her, you're going to have to bring your baby to Canada to see me. And I was like, oh, you can come. You can come. It can be the next time you visit. I'm like spoiled. So I would always tell her that. But so I was due to give birth towards the end of March. And I ended up, my water ended up breaking in the middle of the night 3 weeks early, about 3.5 weeks early. So I was not due to give birth. So I had to go to the hospital late at night. I thought it was just like my water broke and they're like, okay, like you should be able to, I don't know what it was. Like I was like, okay, I guess I'm giving birth. I didn't know what was going on in Canada. I just was worried because I was 3.5 weeks early. And so I was just like, okay, we're going to go through with this. And I wanted a midwife through my whole thing. But it turned out that my daughter, who we now know as my daughter, every time I would have a contraction after the water broke, I was having very mild contractions. Her heart rate would dip. And so they had to keep me for monitoring. And so they had to keep me and then see if I would like dilate on my own and start like the labor process further. But I wasn't dilating quick enough. And so then they decided after hours, like basically I went in the middle of the night, the next morning, they're still keeping me. And it was very wishy-washy. They're like, you may be able to go home in an hour. Never mind, things are going back bad. Like she's struggling with her heartbeat again. You're going to have to stay. And then finally it was like, hey, you're going to be induced, like this is going to happen. And I remember calling my mom and I was like, Mom, I need you here. Like, I need you here now. And so my mom came down and then they're like, hey, we're going to have to do an emergency C-section. The baby's heart rate isn't doing well. Like, I'm going to send in an anesthesiologist. Like, this is going to happen. And I'm somebody who went to a midwife for my entire pregnancy. I wanted to do it the natural way. I was like, kumbaya, hippie fucking to the max. Not what I wanted, not what my birth plan was supposed to be. So I was very disappointed, but obviously I'm going to do what the medical professionals say because I want a happy, healthy baby at the end of the day. And I remember getting ready to be wheeled in to like surgery and getting the call that my ex-husband picked up at the time. But he answered the phone and he was talking to my cousin in Canada. And then he hung up the phone and I looked over and I was like, what? Because his face was, and he's like, Nani died. And I was like, gotta go. Like, I didn't even have time to deal with what was going on. My mom's standing there. She's crying because I'm going into like an emergency surgery. And it was bringing back bad memories of one of her sisters who had to have an emergency C-section who got really ill after. And so, she was like having flashbacks to that, worried about me, and then she hears that her mom passed away, yet I'm going into surgery. It was a very emotional day for everybody. But then at the end of surgery, we had this perfect, beautiful little 6-pound baby girl. And so I ended up, her middle name, one of her middle names is after my nani, actually, because of that unique path. And I like to think that a part of my nani lives on with her. So I digress. But it's a beautiful kind of circle of life a little bit. And I thank God, I honestly do. I thank God, higher power, whatever it is, that things kind of turned out that way, because I don't know how we would have all dealt with her death otherwise. But that is the death that really touched me and still does. And I don't know if we ever get over it. You know, they say time heals all wounds, but when it comes to death, I don't really know if it does. I mean, I now know that I'm not going to talk to my nani every week, but I still miss that. Like, I don't know. I think you can grieve in different ways, and maybe time dulls the pain or the grief, but I don't think it heals it. Not when it's somebody that's so close to you. I don't think it heals it. But we all deal with death and grief differently. And I just think, for me, I just like to think that she's with me and looking over me, and that helps sometimes. Sometimes I will talk to her still, even though she doesn't respond. But it helps, you know? It helps me grieve. So if you're out there and you're grieving, do whatever you need to do to grieve. It's not easy, and I don't know if you'll ever get over it, but find ways that you can deal with it that are positive and that can help you. So for me, that's like talking, right? Having those conversations that I'm having with myself, essentially. But find what it is for you, because I think everybody deals with death differently, and I think that it's a very hard thing to deal with, but we all go through it in one way, shape, or form multiple times. And if you haven't yet, I mean, your time will come, you know. So they say there's two things in this life that are certain: death and taxes. So we'll all experience death in some way, shape, or form in our lifetime. And I think it's hard. Look for people to talk to. I know there's a lot of support helplines out there and hotlines for people that are grieving, that need somebody to talk to. If you're grieving and you want somebody to talk to, you can always reach out to me too. Shoot me a DM or an email. I'll be happy to listen to your grief. It's what helps, I think. Yeah. So that's kind of what this death that happened this week in my family kind of started this conversation, and started me thinking about death and how we all deal with it, and the deaths that I've dealt with in my life. And I figured a lot of people out there deal with death, and I thought that I would share those stories with you guys this week. A little more of a somber tone than we're used to with the Time Pass podcast, but hey, it's life, and that's the kind of thing that I like to talk about. So let me know, are you guys dealing with death? How are you dealing with death? Like I said, I don't know if I have the answers on this one. I just know how I deal with the deaths that hit me hard, and I think support, be there for people. Like, that's why I'm like a funeral attendee. Like, I want to be there for people, even people I don't know that are in my family somehow. Just show up. Show up for people, because that's what you remember. That's what they'll remember. That's what I remember when I had to deal with it. So I remember those people that showed up for me and how important it was for me. So I would say support people and look for that support for yourself, because support is key when dealing with death and trying to get over something. Emotions will run high. There may even be arguments, but you need that support. People need that support. They need that show of solidarity that they have people that they can lean on in such hard times. So that would be my number one advice on dealing with grief. Support, support, support. If it's you, look for support. If it's somebody else, be their support. That's my advice for grieving people. That's all I've got for you today, you guys. Let me know what you thought of this episode. A little bit different, but hey, I thought I'd share what was going on currently in my life and the thoughts that transpired from current events. Alright, you guys, make sure that you are following me on Facebook and Instagram at Time Pass Podcast on Facebook, at Time Pass _podcast on Instagram, and check out the YouTube page, watch this episode. You can find the link on my Instagram profile, link in bio, or on the website, timepasspodcast.com. If you have a few seconds, please give me a rating on iPodcast. I want that 5-star rating, and write a couple sentences if you can about the show. Let me know what you think. And you guys, whatever you do, whether you're grieving or not grieving, being somebody's support, looking for support, write into me. Tell me what you need. I'll be there for you, or just talk. I'll read and respond. Stay authentic in all your interactions, and I'll see you next time. Bye.